What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. On today's episode, I sit down with Nick Grossenbacher, who first encountered and became enamored with the subject of alchemy more than 15 years ago while working on a PhD in late classical and medieval Middle Eastern history. Not content to limit his study to a scholarly text-based approach, he set up a home laboratory and started reproducing some of the processes he was reading about in medieval Arabic and Syriac texts. He soon connected with his teacher, Robert Bartlett, and devoted himself to a study and practice of global alchemical traditions. And he left his teaching career at the outset of the pandemic to start Rare Earth Alchemy, and since then has realized his dream of conducting daily work in a fully outfitted alchemical research and production lab. And so without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome Nick to the show.
Thank you, Yasmin. I'm really excited to be here.
So Nick, to kick it off, can you tell us what exactly is alchemy and why should our listeners care about this subject?
Yeah, that's a great question and one that I get asked quite often. It's also it's a hard question to answer because there are so many ways to go about doing it. But essentially, I would say that alchemy is an art and a science that concerns itself with the transformation of substance or transmutation. And so it can work with plants and minerals to create medicines. It can work with the spirit, the substance of our souls. But it's been so many things in so many places at so many times. So, but the art of transformation, or the art of working with the relationship between spirit and matter, is another way to approach it.
So, Nick, what's like a example of alchemy? Can you give us actually a few examples, like things that you've worked on, or maybe at a macro and a micro level? How can we actually understand it?
Yeah. So in a general sense, when we're talking about alchemical medicine, there's another term that's common here called spagyric medicine or spagyrics, which is it was a word that was coined by a 16th century alchemist, Paracelsus, and it means to break open and recombine. So it's this idea that taking a material like a plant, and through various methods that are kind of core parts of the alchemical or spagyric process, we're fermenting it, we're distilling it, we're separating the various components, purifying those components, and then recombining them to get an essence that has all of the the qualities and virtues of the starting plant, but is incorruptible, something that could last a very long time on the shelf. So one example of this would be taking a plant that I would find in nature, for example, horsetail, which is something that grows plentifully near my house. And if you were to buy a horsetail tincture at the store, it would just be an alcohol extract. But applying the alchemical or spagyric method and separating it into its components of body, soul, and spirit, we're actually going to be getting a lot more from that plant than we would with the tincture making process. The spent matter is usually something that's just discarded, but in the alchemical method, that spent matter is incinerated at high temperatures repeatedly until the ash turns white. And then we'll use distilled rainwater to extract the mineral salts from that spent matter or from the ash. And horsetail is extremely high in essential minerals. And so we'll actually see those minerals grow into crystals in the evaporating dish and recombine them with those oil and volatile spirit components of the plant to get something that's just a lot more potent and effective.
Wow. Okay. So I have so many questions. First of all, what is, when you say the body, the soul, and the spirit does everything have a body, soul, and spirit? And, can you kind of explicitly tell us, like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an essential question, and so in Western alchemy, the Hermetic tradition, we're looking at these two levels, and these are things that are kind of qualities that are present in everything that exists, everything that has mass. So on one level, there are the four elements: earth, fire, air, and water. And these are referring not to the physical earth or physical fire, but rather these states or qualities of being. And then there are the three principles. And the three principles are the body, the soul, and the spirit. In alchemical language, they're also referred to as salt, sulfur, and mercury. And that's something I think that when people look briefly into alchemy and they see, like, oh, mercury, that's not good for you. But what it's referring to here is, looking at, like, what is the quality of quicksilver? It's mercury. It's volatile. It's something that ascends. It evaporates at a low temperature. Sulfur, on the other hand, is something that has this oily quality. So it's looking at those qualities that exist in anything with a body. And in response to your question, yes, everything can be separated into its body, soul, and spirit. And that's, I'd say, the fundamental first step of alchemical work with plants and minerals.
So, when it comes to, when you say the Hermetic approach, are there other approaches to alchemy? And I love, I just got back from a month in Egypt. So I'm like, oh, Hermetic approach. Now I understand where that word comes from.
Yes.
But perhaps you can also share where that word comes from with our audience. And then if there are other ways to look at alchemy.
Yeah, certainly. Hermes Trismegistus, or the thrice great Hermes, is the legendary first alchemist in the Egyptian and Western tradition. And so when I say the Hermetic tradition, we're going back to ancient Egypt. Alchemy was practiced quite deeply and extensively in ancient Egypt with a lot of sophistication. It was something that was pursued by the priestly class, and it produced medicines as well as spiritual practices that were the province of the elite of ancient Egypt. And the god of alchemy to the ancient Egyptians was Thoth, the ibis-headed god of magic. And later on, when Egypt was conquered by the Greeks. The Greeks sort of fused together their gods with their counterparts in the Egyptian pantheon. And so Thoth became Hermes, or the god of the crossroads of communication, the messenger god associated with quickness and uh, and and uh, and thought. And so at some point, very early on, there was a legend of the first alchemist, supposedly somebody who existed incarnate on the earth, who is referred to as Hermes Trismegistus, or the thrice great Hermes, sort of this archetypal wizard figure. And so that particular current or tradition of alchemy, comes out of ancient Egypt, went through classical Greek civilization, and then from there was something that was found throughout the classical world. I don't think the Romans were like too deeply into alchemy, but it was present. But we find it also in all across the Mediterranean. And then after the fall of the Roman Empire, with the beginning of the Islamic Empire, they were the inheritors of the learning of the classical world. And it was like the torch was passed. The torch was passed from Egypt to the Greeks, and then to this golden age of alchemy in medieval Arab and Persian cultures. And from there, with the Renaissance, that knowledge passed into Europe and developed into the sort of alchemy that is probably what a lot of people think of when they hear the word alchemy, which is like woodcut engravings of wizards at their furnace with long beards. So that's the Western tradition, starting in Egypt and through that current. There are other independent, on some level, some level, it's all connected, but other traditions of alchemy. I'd say the most standout being in China, the Taoist alchemy, inner alchemy and outer alchemy, or Weidan and Neidan. And then in the Indian tradition, there's both a very ancient Vedic alchemy as well as an even more ancient Siddha alchemy from southern India.
Wow. That's so fascinating. I feel like alchemy is like a lost tradition, that so many of us don't really have an understanding of, but it impacts and affects our life probably so much more than we can possibly imagine. I'm curious, how can we kind of employ the tools and techniques in this 21st century to advance this old practice? Like what would you encourage our audience to do or think about when it comes to these techniques?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is, I think that alchemy is one of the things that's most fundamental to what human civilization means. It's the ability to look at what exists in the abundance of nature and essentially make things out of it. I hear people often, and I felt this way too, when you hear about some ancient discovery of, if you take some starting material and you do this to it and then this to it, and it ends up with this thing that you want, people are like, how did humans figure that out? Why would somebody go through all that? How did they figure out that happened? And once I started studying alchemy and learning this, it was so clear to me that alchemy is how people figured it out, because it's this whole framework for understanding how matter is composed, how the different parts of it behave. Now you could predict how different parts behave, and thus you can start predicting what will happen when you put these things together. And once I started looking at the world this way, I would look at everything that I would encounter what could I do with this alchemically? And so, from figuring out how to make dyes and gunpowder and mortar to medicines and everything else. It's also another really important component of alchemy is this idea of the macrocosm and the microcosm, and how every individual thing, whether it's a plant or ourselves or a stone, has these qualities that reflect something, a pattern that exists at the macrocosmic level. And in alchemy, we work with the planetary energies, the archetypal qualities of the planets, which have been regarded as gods in the past, and then seeing those qualities as they exist in an individual plant or an individual kind of salt or something like that. And so short of actually getting glassware at home and starting to make things over your alchemical furnace, I would say a really just elementary way in to the alchemical worldview that's valuable for all people is to simply it's a route to simply start having more connection and integration with nature, not as this external object, but this continuum that starts with our own being, our own nature, and which is both an expression and a part of the macrocosm of nature. And one of the early techniques that people are taught in the particular alchemical lineage that is my home lineage, the Western tradition. One of the initial steps into the work is to make a tincture from a plant that represents each of the 7 heavenly bodies of antiquity. So that, there are 7 movable heavenly bodies that we can see with the naked eye, the sun, the moon, and then all of the planets as far as Saturn. And that's what the ancients called planets, so including the sun and the moon. And so you'd find a sun plant, and you'd find a moon plant and a Mercury plant. You make a tincture of each, and you take it on the corresponding day. So like Moon Day, or Tuesday is Mars Day, Wednesday or Woden's Day is Mercury's Day, and so forth. And simply by taking that initial step, you start to come into greater vibration with these qualities, and you start to see them and recognize them in the world. Now I'm having done this for so long, I could see a plant that I don't know in the forest and spend a moment, feeling it and smelling it and be like, oh, this is a Jupiter plant. I might use it this way for healing. So I think even just to see the world in a way where you see yourself as part of it, an expression of these universal qualities, is valuable.
Wow. So I'm very curious, the 7 heavenly bodies, like what is a tincture? Or I guess like what is a plant or something that represents these 7 heavenly bodies, and how can we bring them more into our own life? Like even if we're not creating the tincture, I'm sure that we could find the tincture or find, that elemental quality.
Right. Yeah. And the tincture is just one way. It could also be a tea, or it could be using it on your skin or something like that. So it's also, if you're looking at what kind of planetary energies are present in yourself, you could balance them with opposite energies. So say, for example, somebody has got like going through a phase or a period where they've got overly martial qualities. Think about like, what are the qualities of Mars? It's the warrior planet, Ares, the god of war, the red planet associated with iron and soldiers and blood. And once you get into all of these associations too, it's like it goes so deep the way, like iron is what makes Mars red, and iron is what makes our blood red, and iron is what is made into weapons, from swords to guns. And so if somebody has an excess of martial quality, you might want to balance that out with the Venusian quality, Venus being the feminine counterpart to Mars. Those are the 2 closest planets to Earth on each side. And they have a very strong link between them and with Earth. So you might find a Venus plant, and you could make a tea of it. And that's something that, to look at it that way, something that helps balance out that energy.
What's an example of a Venus plant?
So a Venus plant would be something, the first one that comes to mind is wild asparagus tuber, which is used in Chinese medicine. So the roots of the wild asparagus plant, it's something that is used in both traditional medicine. It's also popular in wellness products today, for helping with different sorts of uterine issues, balancing women's hormones. It has this kind of soothing quality to it. Whereas a Mars plant would be something like nettle, which has a hot sting to it. And if you drink a lot of nettle tea, you will feel the heat in your body. It can rise up into your cheeks, this redness.
So funny. That makes a lot of sense, actually, because when I used to take nettle like many 10 years ago, and my whole body would like get really red.
There you go.
Yeah, that makes sense now.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's so interesting. I love geeking out on like herbs and all that kind of stuff. And I'm curious, do you have any favorites, or do you have any recommendations on things that you see people that that could benefit from on a day-to-day basis, or I guess maybe like what is popular now and why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So on one level, I think there's just being in tune with what's around you. I used the example of horsetail earlier. It grows everywhere around my house and in my neighborhood. And horsetail, it's so rich with those. If you think about the way it's structured, it's got this kind of hard, strong stalk that just keeps going up, and so it's associated with the health of the bones. And it turns out it's actually got a lot of the mineral content that that helps us grow bones, or is part of bones. And another example is I have so much mint in my yard and around my house. So I've gotten to know all the different kinds of mint. I like to use it as a digestive. I also like to use it as a little pick me up, like mash some fresh mint leaves in my hand and cup my hands over my face and just like huff those mint oils, which is really enlivening. So at the level of just being connected to what's around us, get to know the plants that are in your life and in your neighborhood and in your yard, or that you walk past on your way to work or whatever. And I'm sure there's a lot there that's really useful. And then in terms of just what are some of my favorite plants that I like to use as supplements. One of my favorite plants is Godu kola, which doesn't grow around here. It's something that's found in India and Southeast Asia. Are you familiar with Godu kola?
I think I just recently heard about it, but I don't know the benefits of it.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a green plant that grows in wet areas, and it's associated with mercury. And so you'll find Gotu kola in a lot of supplements for like nootropic kind of cognitive enhancement purposes. It also helps the vascular system. People take extracts of Gotu kola for like varicose veins or for um, blood flow issues, because it helps. It's a vasodilator, and that means also that it helps open up the blood vessels in the brain and get more blood flowing, and thus can help with mental clarity. It also helps with inflammation, and so I use Gotu kola in one of my topical products, but it's also a plant that I just love to have around. Another cool historical use is that Buddhist monks in like Tibet and Nepal and India would drink Gotu kola before meditating for a long time, because they said that it helped balance the hemispheres of the brain. And so it's not like stimulating like caffeine, but it's something that's like clarifying and can help with stamina with something like that.
Wow. I love that. Okay, so I will check out Gotu kola. Is there anything else that you think that you've seen, maybe for people coming out of the pandemic, that's been, more popular than others, or just in general? It feels like that there's like a lot of new kind of
Yeah.
behaviors
Yeah.
emerging.
Definitely. No, it's huge. So one of my favorite adaptogens lately has been ashwagandha, which is sometimes referred to as Indian ginseng. It's not heating in the same way that ginseng is, but it is a great kind of general overall uh, uh, boost to the system, and because it's adaptogenic, that means that it doesn't just do like one thing. There's some plants that are used in medicine because they have this like one action, but an adaptogen just kind of strengthens your body uh, as a whole. And so if an adaptogen could even be something that if you're having trouble falling asleep, it could help bring your system into balance so that you fall asleep more easily. But if you have trouble, being awake, it could do the opposite and help you have more energy while you're awake.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, so ashwagandha, and then another plant that I have gotten really into since the pandemic is andrographis, which is sometimes referred to as the king of bitter herbs, also called chiretta. And it's this extremely bitter green plant that's found in India and Southeast Asia, although since then it's been grown all over the world. And I think it is the best botanical immune and upper respiratory system protector. So whenever I'm going to be out, if I'm going to be on the subway in New York City, or I'm going to be in a room full of people, if I'm in any situation where I think I might be exposed to respiratory viruses, I will take it beforehand and afterwards. And then if I'm exposed to anything, I double up on it. And it has definitely been a great protector, I think, and has gotten me out of getting colds or other viruses of that sort.
Andrographis. Okay.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I love it.
And it's the only plant that has been approved by any government to treat COVID. In Thailand, it was actually clinically tested and approved by the government as part of a COVID treatment protocol.
Wow. Okay. Well, that is pretty spectacular. Amazing.
Yeah.
So I could spend like the next like several hours just talking to you about this stuff, but I want to switch gears, and I actually want to ask you about something in the book you recommended called On Alchemy, which is by Brian. Oh my gosh, what's his last name?
I think he pronounces it Cotnoir. Cotnoir. I don't think it's the French. I think it's like Cotnoir. Yeah.
Cat Noir. Okay. So I haven't read the whole book, but I've read parts of it, and like what I've read, I've really loved. And there's this one chapter called Essential Practices, where like every chapter kind of starts out with like a quote and then goes into into his reflections on the quote. So he says, let's turn to the idea of perfecting the soul through the making of things. And he quotes Zosimos, make these things until you become perfect in your soul. Why is the art of making things such an important process of connecting with one's soul? I'm curious because it feels like when you're describing your own desire to go to the lab and tinker with things and play with all these chemicals, that there's like a playfulness, there's like a joy involved in that process. And so, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say it's that playfulness and that joy that is, for me, kind of the main guiding force, the main guiding impetus behind doing this work. And so, what he's referring to in that book is something that is widely recognized as a really essential part of the alchemical path, which is that, some people talk about alchemy as it's like all a metaphor for like the inner work. Well, it does refer really explicitly to the inner work, but it's not a metaphor. The inner work and the outer work are actually not separate, and that's because if our body, our being, is a microcosm of the whole, representing the macrocosm, then the work that we do externally is also work that we're doing internally. So, without necessarily having to think about it a particular way in order to get to the next step, by doing the alchemical work, we are coming into greater harmony with these processes and forces of nature. So by doing some basic spagyric herb work, and then we're using a volatile spirit to separate the soul and the spirit of a plant from the body, and then you light a fire, or you start a propane flame, and you put the spent mass over that flame, and you sit there for a while as it starts to burn, and you see what happens when the heat increases, and the way the wet vital essence of the plant starts to leave and ascend as smoke, and leave behind an ash that starts off black and turns lighter gray, and if you keep it going long enough, can turn white. And so you're taking part in this process of transformation by affecting it on external substances. And so simply by being present with it and witnessing it, it activates a knowing within us. And then, once you have the different components, you've got your salt, and you watch the geometric form of the salt crystals emerging from the solution as the water evaporates. You're thinking about, the water as it breaks down into its molecules that are so light that they float away into the air, and then you're distilling out the spirit from the soul, and then you see the soul forming as a ring of green oil on the inside of your flask, and the way that it moves, and the way that it drips down to the center and then ascends and comes back down. So you're just really getting to know intimately and firsthand what these principles look like, how they operate in matter, and that just starts doing things internally. I also find that when I work on something, it'll be reflected in my dreams, and it'll show up through the allegorical language of dreams. And so all of these different layers of reality start to unfold as we work with them, and we become an active participant in the forces and cycles of nature.
Mm. So beautiful. I love that. I think that many of us are so disconnected from nature, and the way that you speak about this work is feeling like, it's a remembering of where things are coming from and where they're going, and how we're all connected in that journey in space. And so it's just so beautiful to hear that. And, I'm wondering, Nick, you talk about like traditional alchemy and how that intersects with some of the work of contemporary clinicians and naturopath, and you spoke about Ayurveda earlier. I'm curious, how does alchemy kind of fit into some of these other traditions?
Yeah. So it has whether people know that what they're working with is alchemy or not, it has a really fundamental place. Even, herbalism. So what an herbalist makes, even if they're not thinking of it in the language of alchemy, what they're doing comes from the knowledge of the alchemists. And, and as well, the whole history of pharmaceutical drugs was something that emerges out of alchemy, starting around the time of the Renaissance. And, that was the beginning of isolating chemicals and later synthesizing chemicals, and then, trying them out and seeing what they do to a body. So it all comes from alchemy, but in a sort of 21st century context of like, how do we consciously, draw from the alchemical tradition and apply it to health and wellness. So it's actually in the German-speaking countries, Germany and Austria and Switzerland, that there is a form of natural medicine, which is referred to in German as biologic medicine or biologic medicine, that is essentially alchemical spagyric medicine. And in those countries, it's actually pretty mainstream. In Germany, if you're having a health issue, your doctor will most likely try herbs first before trying pharmaceutical drugs. And that's just the way our system of medicine is set up in this country. That's not what will happen when you visit a general practitioner. But it's so at the level of using plants and herbs for our health, whether it's addressing conditions that we have and trying to balance them out, or taking adaptogens for better overall health. That's something that I think consciously applying the alchemical wisdom is something that will just result in better medicines. India, interestingly, so it was the scientific revolution that alchemy was sort of like very intentionally cut away from this new science of chemistry and medicine, and it wasn't included in the academy, and so it went underground. It's continued, it's persisted since then, and even a lot of early chemists and even modern day pharmaceutical chemists are people who have an interest in alchemy, but it's not something that's really shared openly. But in India, Ayurvedic alchemy never went underground. It's something that is, for centuries, it's a really effective system of medicine that uses not only plants, but minerals and metals to create drugs that have been studied for centuries and that work really well, that work quickly. And there are, alchemical medicine departments of colleges in India where they do clinical research on traditional alchemical products. So we have a lot of, clinical data valid to a modern scientific perspective on alchemical medicine that comes from India. And that's something with the growth of awareness and interest in Ayurveda, and I'd say also connected to that, the growth and interest in traditional Chinese medicine in this country. That's another route through which I think people are starting to come into greater contact with alchemy for health, whether they know it or not.
It's fascinating. Wow. Yeah. I'm like thinking back about my time in Bali, where there was a lot of Ayurvedic, practices, and there's something about connecting with that space that feels in alignment with all matter, with the planets, with the nature, and I think that you keep talking about that too in this work, that there's so much of a planetary, a cosmic alignment,
Yeah.
that the micro pieces in nature are actually just a microcosm of the whole, essentially.
Yeah.
I want to talk about this idea of, 'cause the conversation around AI and machine learning and how everything's kind of getting replaced with artificial intelligence is become very prevalent right now in the cultural conversation in the West. And what can traditional alchemy tell us about this sort of unique and special capacity of being human?
That's a great question, and something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And I have been engaging with AI tools, and that's also something that I've really been exploring and thinking about and utilizing. And so on one level, as AI is now able to create poetry and art and prose and write code and do all of these things, some people would argue that it's not, but it's creating images, and sometimes beautiful images. Uh, and as well, there's an AI that creates molecules. It like has studied all of chemistry, has learned from all of chemistry, and it's actually capable of essentially, in air quotes, like thinking up new molecules and creating them. And there have actually been some drugs that have been created by AI that have already been introduced. So at the level now of this intelligence is creating matter. It's creating new kinds of matter, and and AI, if given a body in the form of robots, will be able to do, or already does, all sorts of work and labor. And there's a lot of discussion and fear around how it's going to replace people in a lot of arenas. So, at the simple level of walking through a forest and recognizing useful plants and picking them and making medicine out of them, I suppose that's something that we might be able to train AI to do. But on one hand, that's something that I think will continue to lie in the domain of humans. And at a more when we're looking at a kind of more like advanced level of what alchemy means, and we haven't talked about this yet, but alchemy, when we talk about like the alchemical great work, which is beyond just making tinctures and medicines from individual plants, but this notion of perfecting matter through creating the philosopher's stone. And what alchemy works with is something that I might call like exotic matter, something that is through the alchemical work is demonstrably there and affecting its host substance, but not something that we can look at directly. And that exotic matter is present in us. It's something that's present in living beings. And, is it present in circuitry? Maybe, but not in the same way. And so that's something that I think is, that one of the highest spiritual capabilities of human beings is the ability to be an active participant in reality through, working with that exotic matter. And I know that that's probably like what I'm saying is kind of obscure, but maybe starts to give a sense. But that's a uniquely human capability.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I understand and I grok what you're saying. I think that for people who are mostly in their heads versus their bodies or their hearts, like that distinction then becomes a kind of a different experience.
Mm-hmm.
But there is this like amazing, like you said, this interaction, this kind of weaving, this dancing with matter that I think we have to be in our bodies to even really understand and play with that and and so it sort of feels like we're at this point in culture where a lot of people in the West, and I'm just generally speaking, but it feels like we're sort of dominant in our left brain and in our logical mind and analytical mind. And so we're, AI feels like that to me feels like the starting point of the conversation. It's like, well, where is the human at right now? And like,
right.
And so, I love your philosophy and work. Before we move on to kind of our final couple questions, I wanted to ask about your teacher, Robert Bartlett, I think is his name.
Yeah. Robert Bartlett.
Yes. How did you meet him and who was he?
Yeah. So he's still present. So he when I was really getting into alchemy and kind of moving from the academic scholarly way in to actually practicing, and then it was actually on the night of that I proposed to my now wife. And she responded by proposing to me with a performance art piece back, and and it was a really like special, emotionally potent experience. And then that night, I had a dream. I've only had 2 dreams like this in my entire life, but it was like watching this massive epic movie unfold that was so rich with all of this symbolism and numerology, and I'm still going back and finding more in this dream. But the culmination of this dream was me discovering a book of alchemical knowledge that was in like a it was in like a Spencer's at the mall, and they told me I wasn't allowed to have it, and I ended up taking that book and running. And I remember looking through the pages and seeing the alchemical diagrams and symbols, and that to me, like, that was an important moment in which I feel like it was like a self-initiation into the current of alchemy. And after I had that dream, some interesting synchronicities happened, one of which was connecting me with my teacher, Robert Bartlett. I was living in Seattle at the time and saw a flyer for an alchemy conference, and it's like, I got to go to that. So I went and met Robert. And at the time, I was like, you know, it was like meeting a celebrity to me, and I was like, didn't even have all of my words because he was so awe-inspiring. And when I first met him, I had this sense like, this is a different kind of human. Like, this is his energy body, his presence is different. I'm really intrigued. He's a really humble, unassuming, brilliant man, and there's something about being in his presence that feels different. And I think that even people who aren't necessarily like really tuned into alchemy feel that. And so that day at the alchemy conference, I ended up winning in a raffle, tuition for his initial introductory course. So he lives on a Native American reservation outside of Seattle. I think a really important part of the Robert Bartlett story is that he was also a chemist. That was his career. He's retired now, but he was a chemist and he worked in the aerospace industry. He studied alchemy. His teacher, Albert Riedel, or Frater Albertus was his alchemical name, was a German Rosicrucian. He came over after World War II, started teaching in the United States. And he had this mission that he stated as, the secret knowledge that was passed down from master to disciple and very closely guarded over many generations. Well, now in the mid-20th century, he recognized that it was time for this knowledge to come forward and be more available to the world. And so he taught a number of cohorts of students over time, and he single-handedly, is a big part of the alchemical revival in the United States and in the West. And Robert was with him from the time that he was a late adolescent, and then went into his chemistry career. But through his chemistry career, he also had access to this massive multi-million-dollar analytical equipment, and really rigorously tested all of his alchemical products. We're talking about like oil of gold and oil of silver and oil of antimony and all of these different kinds of salts. He analyzed them. And so now, for the first time in the history of alchemy, we have a massive amount of data of even like what chemically these things are. And he's also trained so many people who are now taking that knowledge and finding ways to apply it in the 21st century. He's still teaching. He has a school called the Spagyaricus School, and a organization called TriStar. And he's trained a lot of people. And every time that I've spent time with Robert, I've also met people who've become good friends and are also important characters in my alchemical journey.
That's so cool. Spagyaric School. Amazing.
Yeah, Spagyaricus. Yeah.
Very cool. Looking back on your journey, Nick, what has surprised you the most? It could be about alchemy, its impact on people, impact on you. I mean, how do you think about this work, and what has surprised you the most?
So the first thing that comes to mind is that initially I was, it's like, I love this so much. And also it's so esoteric. And, I'm doing this like out here in this kind of area, this fringe side area. And, how do I integrate it with my life? And as I've grown into the work, and especially since, starting my company, I have, I've had to engage with the mundane world in a way that was, far beyond what I ever had hoped to do in order to, learn how to create a sustainable business, and to apply this knowledge in ways that, went beyond kind of the conceptual or the philosophical to being useful. And, even like for people who aren't necessarily interested in alchemy, but who will benefit from those things. I was listening to some of your other podcasts, and recently you spoke with somebody about, you're talking about astrology, and I was struck by the fact that you had the same north-south node orientation that I did, the
Oh,
Gemini Sagittarius. And so, in the way that now you take your philosophical orientation to the world, and you make it useful, and you share it through running a podcast and all of the work that requires, and how much mundane competency you need in order to do this, and then you're getting these messages out there. And I think in a similar way, I feel like on some level I've spent lifetimes mastering this esoteric knowledge, and now, in order to bring that to the world and share it in a way that's useful and practical, I'm having to completely sort of entrench myself in the world of contemporary culture and matter. And so it's been I didn't expect that going out on a limb and studying this like ancient esoteric science was going to make me just like a better business person and more tuned into the world as it is today.
I love that. That's so cool. I love that we have the same North Node.
Yeah. When I heard that, I thought that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, they say like, Gemini North Nodes are writers and public, doing a lot of public
Mm-hmm.
speaking. And
Yeah.
so that's cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. And
It's-
I see writing and education as a big part of my path ahead.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah. If you don't already have an alchemy school, I mean, I'd love to be one of the students. So Nick, what do you want to tell our listeners as your main takeaway, call to action? What do you want people to do today as when they think about alchemy and this work?
I would say that you can do so much by approaching the vastness of wisdom through starting with yourself and your own body and your own inner energetic sphere. Pay attention to your dreams, pay attention to your body, in the same way that if you start learning about those basic qualities that are present in the field of our reality, that are represented by the planets. So it's not the planets per se that are those energies, but the planets are representatives of those energies. So if you just start tuning in and paying attention to these things that you'll learn about, if you get an introductory book to alchemy, like Robert Bartlett's introductory primer or something like that, and just start doing that, and things will start happening. And pay attention to your dreams. Then you'll start noticing things about your organ systems, and start looking at plants a different way, start looking at metals a different way. So simply by starting within will lead us to everything without.
Oh, I love that so much. That's so great. And then where can people find you to learn more about your work, learn more about your products?
Yeah. So my company is called Rare Earth Alchemy, and we currently are offering a line of alchemical skincare products through a brand called Realia Alchemical Skincare. So you could go to realia.com. That's REALEA.com. And Realia Skincare is just the beginning, but that's really where I'm putting my energy and efforts right now.
Love that. And we'll include that in the show notes.
Great.
Amazing. Nick, thank you so much for your time. This was so wonderful. I feel like we just scratched the surface on alchemy, but there's plenty of resources now to go down different rabbit
Yeah.
holes. And I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, such a pleasure to talk to you as well. And thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you, Nick. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about alchemy with Nick Grossenbacher. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.